by the sea,
by the beautiful sea.
you and me, oh how happy we'll be.
When each wave comes a-rolling in,
We will duck or swim.
and we'll float and fool around.
Good morning, I'm your host, Harry Orgovan, and welcome to another episode of Our Lives, Our Future. And we're sponsored by the Chula Vista Library, the City of Chula Vista, the South Bay Historical Society, and the Chula Vista Heritage Museum you see behind me right here. Today we're very lucky and honored to have with us a very honored citizen of the City of Chula Vista, Peter Watry. Good morning, Peter. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
So I wanted to mention we're going to use our Dr. Bronner's hand sanitizer real quick. And I'll pass it on to you. You can go ahead and spray that. This is the lavender scent. Just helps keep us a little safer here when we do our interviews. Well, let's start off by finding out where you were born and a little bit about your education and how you eventually made your way to Chula Vista.
Well, I was born in Los Angeles. My parents moved to Glendale when I was a year old, so I grew up in Glendale. Went to UCLA and USC. I was an accountant. I worked 5 years as an accountant. I got tired of cheating, so I decided to try to get a certificate to teach in the community colleges. And I did, and I was hired in 1961 to come to Chula Vista where Southwestern College was opening. So I was one of the original teachers in Southwestern College.
You came in 1961 to Chula Vista, and one of the first things you encountered was the City of Chula Vista wanted to widen 2nd Avenue, so it was a 4-lane back and forth. And tell me what happened from there.
Well, in 1962, we bought our home on North 2nd Avenue, and I still live there today. Later in the 60s, I suppose about 1969 or so, in those days, and still, the council meets on Tuesday evenings. I found out by accident on Friday that was on the agenda. The city manager wanted to widen 2nd Avenue to 4 lanes all the way from Sweetwater River to 8th Street. It so happened a neighbor down the street who I didn't know at the time also found out. So somehow we got together, and we spent that weekend canvassing every house from C Street to 8th Street, telling them about the council meeting, what was at stake, and please show up. So, and my wife and another woman cut a whole bunch of green ribbons about 3 to 4 inches high. And when at the council meeting, when people came in, were you here on this item? Yes. They would pin a green ribbon on them, and they all come in. We packed the council chambers to overflowing. And normally there are 7 people up on the dais, the 5 council members, the city manager, and the city attorney. In those days there were 8 chairs up there. The 8th chair was for a member of one of our many commissions to attend and watch the goings on. Now he didn't participate, but he was introduced at the first of the program. So Mayor Hamilton introduced him. He was from the Planning Commission, and he invited him to say a few words. Well, the gentleman looks out at the audience and says, I don't know what's on the agenda tonight, but all I see out there is a sea of green ribbons. I'd say that was American democracy in action. Well, that didn't hurt our case at all. So our item finally came up. I spoke on behalf of the neighborhood, and they voted 5-0 not to widen 2nd Avenue. So we won that battle. At that time, Chula Vista was a nice 2-lane, tree-lined road. 2020, it still is. Still that way. Now, if you drive north on 2nd Avenue, you'll eventually cross Sweetwater River. Now you're in National City. Well, in those days, the channel had not been built that's there now. It was just a winding river. And so it was dry most of the time. So all they did was push a bunch of dirt over the river and put a pavement on top, and there was a temporary road to cross that river. And if we had a big rain or the dam really had a big release and it washed out, they simply wait till it dried out and then put more dirt down and do it again. But we knew somehow that they had intended a bridge. So we went down to Caltrans to see what the bridge was going to be. Well, it was going to be a 4-lane bridge. So we went to our favorite councilman at that time, Will Hyde. He was always on our side, and told him, maybe since you took your action not to widen 2nd Avenue, you might tell Caltrans not to build a 4-lane bridge. So they did. And now if you traveled 2nd Avenue and cross Sweetwater River, you're on a big cement, nice 2-lane bridge.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So you and your wife Susan were quite a team. How did you meet your wife Susan? And tell me about the children you had too.
Oh, oh, met Susan. Well, after I graduated from college, I was an cost accountant in Glendale for a while, and Susan she was born and raised in Illinois on a farm, but somehow she wound up in Glendale. So she got a job at the Sears Roebuck in Glendale. Well, my last semester at UCLA, I only had to take a few courses, so I decided to get a part-time job. My dad thought I should be earning some money. Anyway, so I got a part-time job at Sears. Now I ended up as the helper, the boy in the linens department, or whatever it's called, with women buy sheets and pillows and stuff. And my job was to help bring supplies down from the attic down when they needed more supplies. At that time, the Sears also had people who would go out and customize your home, and they would come by and tell me what rod lengths they need, order for rods, that job. Anyway, the same department that Susan was in, so that's where we met. Mm-hmm. And we've been grateful to Sears Roebuck ever since. I'm sorry to see them fail.
Okay, and tell me, you ended up having children?
We have 3 kids.
3.
Pete's the oldest kid, and then Derek's the boy, and Suzanne's our daughter. Pete runs a couple coffee shops in La Jolla. My son Derek is the president of a small engineering firm that deals with noise and vibration in the San Francisco area, and Suzanne's a teacher, Elsinore district. And they're all self-supporting.
That's good. That's good, Peter. Very important these days, for sure. You mentioned your daughter being a teacher. I've heard some rumors that you would find out about certain families that perhaps were your daughter's students and they needed help. Your wife and you would see that they had Christmas presents with their names on those presents, and they never knew where they came from. Is that
How'd you hear about that? Yeah. For a while, she taught down here in the South Bay area, and there'd be students there who were very poor, and they weren't going to have a Christmas. And so she would go out. Through Suzanne, we'd find out how many kids they have, how old they were, and so forth. And Susan would go out and buy presents for them. Mm-hmm. And then one of our sons would act as delivery boy. So we'd go there at night, and they'd go up and knock on the door and just deliver all this stuff. And they didn't know any better, and they never caught on. The mothers, all these were mothers who didn't have a husband in the house, and so they were poor. And so they never figured out. But what she enjoyed, though, was the next time school started after Christmas, these kids would be telling these other kids, you wouldn't believe what happened to us. And they'd tell them all about, somebody showed up with all these gifts. And they never caught on.
That's neat, Peter. That's really wonderful. So tell me about, you had some interest in a sports project that was called Sports World. Tell me about that and your involvement.
Well, there was a dentist in San Diego named Dr. Leonard Bloom. And not only was he a dentist, he was also a developer. And his specialty was buying real cheap land, like in Kansas and stuff. So he came to Chula Vista, and he got an option on all the land that is now between 805 and almost Southwestern College, what is now East H Street. And that land is Rice Canyon, and tributaries of Rice Canyon, and deep hills, and it's very tough property. But he got an option on that property, and he wanted to build this massive development, basically from 805 to almost Southwestern College to do it. And he had thousands of houses planned, he had shopping centers planned, and he had an arena. At that time, there was a separate basketball league to the NBA. It was called the ABA, the American Basketball Association. And Dr. Bloom owned the local team, the Conquistadors. And they were playing their games in Golden Hall in downtown Civic Center in San Diego. So he also had a basketball team, and he was going to build a 20,000 seat arena to compete with the arena down in the Midway area. And so he brought this plan to the council. Well, we opposed it. That 805 was just barely getting started to be built. And to get to this arena, you'd have to drive up to the Halecrest area. So the Halecrest area people were really upset about it. And that was most of our help came from. So 3 other people, we formed an organization, Gene Coleman, Carol Smith, Esther Lassman, and myself. And we called it Citizens Concerned for Chula Vista. And so we started fighting this monstrosity, and we had lots of help. Well, to make a long story short, it was approved by the council. Now, what he was going to do in those days, like Western Chula Vista, they set up on a grid system. Well, and even San Francisco and all those hills used a grid system. That's why there's cable cars and Lombard Street in San Francisco. Well, so to do that, he was going to flatten the whole area of Rice Canyon from 805 to almost Southwestern College into two mesas, 2 flat mesas, so he could develop on the grid system. Well, we fought all that. That would destroy Chula Vista as far as we were concerned. So the council finally approved it. And so we got up a referendum. A referendum is if you get enough signatures on a petition, and it's 15% of the registered voters in the area, which we did. We had a lot of help. We got the signatures easily, and so the council had a choice. They either cancel that agreement or put it to a vote. And so they decided to put it to a vote. The vote was to be in fall of 1973. So there was a long campaign took place, and it was very bitter. Everybody had an opinion that was so big that it was neighbor against neighbor, wife against husbands, and the wifers turned out to be much wiser. And it was just a very bitter campaign that I look back still with horror, but we felt we had to do it. And at one point, Dr. Bloom hired Wilt Chamberlain as coach of his team. Now, Wilt Chamberlain was the first 7-foot tall player who was a great athlete. At one point, he scored 100 points in the NBA on an NBA team. That's never been done before or since, but he retired by this time. So he got Wilt Chamberlain to be coach of his team, the Conquistadors. Well, he wasn't really the coach. He only showed up for the games. He wasn't the real coach. The real coach coached them in their practices. Well, NBC National News even couldn't believe that. I was back east at that time and was on that, even NBC National News. So someplace out there in the west called Chula Vista, a developer has hired Wilt Chamberlain as his coach for the games to win that election. Well, it went on and on. When the election finally came, it was, as far as I know, the highest percentage turnout in Chula Vista history. But we barely won. And that was that, we thought. Well, not quite. Dr. Bloom came back a year later with a modified plan. It wasn't quite as bad, but it was still unacceptable to us. Now we had Citizens Concerned for Chula Vista 2, and lots of support. So same battles, not quite as bitter this time. He wasn't going to flatten all those valleys and hills. It wasn't quite as bad, and we won by a bigger margin that time. So the mayor, Tom Hamilton at the time, said, let's talk. So he formed a committee called Accord, A-C-C-O-R-D, but he wanted an accord. So it was about 10 people on each side, 10 people on our side, 10 people on their side. I was co-chairman. representing our side. A real estate man was the co-chairman on the other side. So we would meet with the planning staff, the city's planning staff, and talk about this, talk about that, how about this, how about that? No, you can't do that for some reason. So it went through it was interesting, went through a long planning session with the staff to see things. We finally came to an agreement, and an accord of all things. And so now it had to go through the process. So first thing was the planning commission. So we go before the planning commission. Now their usual way is first call the affirmative people, then call the negative people. But I said to my fellow co-chairman, why don't we walk up there together? We agreed. So we did. So we walked up together. And the members of the planning commission and the council later told us that was very impressive. You talked together. Yeah. Now, I don't have the plans for that anymore that we drew up, but if you want to see what we drew up, just drive out East 8th Street. And what you see on East 8th Street out there by the shopping center where Costco is, that was what we came up with. And it had a big shopping center where Costco is. It had a shopping center near 805, and it had many houses, but the houses were up on rims. Rice Canyon is still there. The form of the land was saved, and still the canyon is still there, and so forth. And that thousands of houses now are up on the ridges. And so that's the plan we came up with.
Well, that's incredible, Peter, that you and the people you worked with were able to ensure that the environment was still protected and preserved in its natural form, but yet it still could be utilized for development, and how your group was able to work with developers to achieve that. It's very impressive, Peter. Thank you.
No, we didn't work with developers. We worked with the staff.
Oh, okay. The staff of the city of Chula Vista.
Dr. Bloom was history.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Very good. And can you tell me, I remember reading about you and your wife worked to take our water company, the Sweetwater Authority Water Company, from a once private entity to a public entity. Can you tell me about your involvement in that?
Okay, the Sweetwater Dam was completed in 1888, and that has furnished water to National City, Bonita, and the western half of Chula Vista ever since. Now, it was a private company all this time. The developers of National City built that dam. So it's a private company all this time. Well, by the 1970s, some people thought it should be public, and so they made it. Well, it's complicated. I'll have to tell you that it was a private company, but about 1930s or 40s they built the aqueduct to bring water from Colorado to San Diego. Well, private companies can't use that water. So what happened was National City formed a water company called National City Water Company, and technically they bought the water, but they put it in the reservoir. Now Chula Vista did the same thing. We formed the Chula Vista Water Company, so we bought the water and put it in the reservoir. Well, that left Bonita out, and so Chula Vista got together with Bonita and formed the Sweetwater Authority of Chula Vista and Bonita. Now, those water companies still exist theoretically. So if you go to a meeting of the San Diego Water Authority, there'll be a National City representative and a Chula Vista representative there. But in reality, it was all one. So those people thought the dam and the reservoir ought to be public. Well, at that time, it was owned by California. What do they call it? Caltrans. No, it wasn't Caltrans. I forgot the name of the company. But they resisted, of course. And so they finally took it to court, and after a long years, they finally approved it. And so what they had to do was have a vote to have the people approve it and to approve the bonds to buy the water company. They asked Gene Coleman, I referred to earlier, he was a real hothead environmentalist. Yeah. They asked him to be the leader of the campaign. He said, no, get Susan Watry. So Susan Watry was the leader of that campaign. Now, to be a special election, now the first thing the other side should have done is go to the registrar and see who votes on the registrar, or who votes on special elections, and not very many people.
Right.
And so we did that, so we know who would vote. So we walked just a few precincts, and 3 times we walked them, that precincts. Our opponents, the water company, worked the whole city of Chula Vista, which mostly wasted money. When the vote came in, we won 1/3 of the precincts. They won 2/3 of the precinct. We won the vote because we got our people turned out, and their people didn't. I have personally feel guilty about that ever since. Is that fair that you decide an important job like that just because we knew our politics and they didn't?
Yeah.
That still bothers me. But everybody else, all the winners poo-pooed it. I like it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we won it, and it became the Sweetwater Authority.
So you've done a lot in our city to make it beautiful and have the development be the type that we can ensure serves our community well. Tell me about on North Del Mar. What was that all about? There was a large lot there.
Okay, when the city was formed in 1911, they made C Street the northern boundary. You would have thought they'd make the Sweetwater River, but they didn't. They made it C Street. Well, there's a few areas beyond C Street, about 2 blocks beyond C Street. So that's county. That was county, still county. We have a lot of those around the edge of Chula Vista. So the north of C Street was county, and that's how we always referred to it. Well, in county, back up. Well, Chula Vista has a sewer system, but you have to be in the city of Chula Vista. So if you're in the county, you're on septic tanks. So they were all on septic tanks. Well, that was fine. They're all single-family houses, and most of them still are. And we even have some rentals inside Chula Vista still on septic tanks. Our house was built in 1940. It's got a septic tank. Now, they hooked on the sewer before we bought it, but that's still pretty common. Anyway, in the county, it had to be septic tanks, and they still are. Well, it was all developed out probably in the 1930s, not very big, all developed out in the 1930s. It was a nice little community, they all knew each other and so forth. And they were all single-family houses on single-family lots with one exception. There was one exception, where there was a huge lot. I don't know that story at all, with a house in the middle. And I don't know that story at all, but it was a huge lot on the western edge of that development, of that little community. Well, as people got older, they decided to move. I don't know the story where they went, but they turned control of the property over to their son, who lived in El Cajon. So the son shows up with a developer. They want to build apartment houses on this big piece of property. Well, I don't think you can have septic tanks with apartments. I don't know if you can do that or not, but he didn't want to. He wanted to be a sewer. So what he wanted to do was next to Chula Vista so he could hook onto the sewer. So he asked the city council to pre-zone his property for R3, for apartments. And if they did, then he would next to Chula Vista and hook up the sewer. Well, that didn't suit that little community at all. It would just change that little community to have some big apartments there. So they fought that. And the people that fought it extended all the way down the block to me and a lot of other people. We didn't want that. So we fought that. When it went to council, the council said, no, we're not going to do it. Well, we won that battle, and I learned my first lesson in economics because the guy went away. But that property was still there. It still had value. It's not going anywhere. So this game isn't over yet. He comes back a year later with another developer, wants to put up apartments. Same story. He asked the city to annex to Chula Vista and change it, but first pre-zone to apartments, R3, and then I will annex to Chula Vista and so forth. Same story, same council, same result, no. Well, Jim Peterson was our planning director at that time. So he decided to take it into his hands. He asked the council, would you please rezone it R1 so we can get this over with? And so they did. They pre-zoned it R1. Today, if you drive up North Del Mar on the left-hand side, you'll see 17 R1 houses in that plot. And it's a little street in between them all. And so 17 houses. Now, what is strange beyond all is the fact what kind of houses they built. Exactly what are being built in Otay Ranch and East Lake. Tall, two-story houses fill the whole lot. And they're all plastic with red tile roofs. They look like they just came out of Otay Ranch. The rest of the houses there are all 1930s bungalows or something. The contrast is so dramatic. I'll bet the people in those houses do not associate with the people in those monstrous things they built. Anyway, that took care of the apartment houses.
So let's go west right now, Peter, and look down at the bayfront and the new development that was proposed in past years and will finally be taking place starting next year, I believe. Can you tell us your involvement with that area, Peter?
Oh, the bayfront. Yes, indeed. The bayfront, if you go on the bayfront today, what you look at mostly is fill. It's not the land that was there before. So the Port District has jurisdiction over most of the bayfront. Not all of it, some Chula Vista jurisdiction, but they have most of it. So they announced, I think it was in 2002, they're going to redevelop Chula Vista's bayfront because there wasn't much development there anyway. So they're going to do that. And so they start having a whole bunch of meetings, public meetings, what to do, what to plan. So this plan, that plan, and so forth, and it went on and on. The port wants to redevelop Chula Vista's bayfront. And so we have a whole bunch of meetings. And the director of the bayfront was the guy who ran the meetings. And he was really sharp. In fact, before this whole thing was over, he got the job of top guy of the Los Angeles Long Beach Port District. So he was sharp. But he said the hotels come in last. What people had in mind was kind of a mini Miami Beach on our bayfront. But he's warned us the hotels would come in last. They don't come in till there's a reason to come in. People are using it. So now we have Crossroads 2 has been formed. Pat Aguilar is the main person that formed Crossroads 2. And at one point we had over 500 members. So instead of important people with influence, we had 500 people give us some influence and so forth. So she formed Crossroads 2, and she was at all those meetings. So how do we solve this problem of trying to get people down there, so the hotels we built? Well, she suggested a signature park. A signature park, there'd be concerts, there'd be things going on where people attract people to the bayfront. And after you try to take a lot of people to the bayfront, maybe hotels would be built. And so they gave us an example in Chicago, what Chicago did to get people coming down to their lakefront. And so the signature park was the main focal point of that plan. The plan was approved by the city in Chula Vista, and the Port District were doing this together with the Port District, the lead agency, and their planners are doing the actual drawings. So the city of Chula Vista approved that plan, the port approved that plan. Out of nowhere, Gaylord Hotel shows up. It's completely surprised everybody. A hotel shows up and they want to build a hotel. That changed everything. Why would they do that? Well, it turned out that they had a very unusual business plan. Gaylord Hotel, their main people they're attracting are small to intermediate sized conventions. They weren't after tourists and they weren't after local visitors. They were after these conventions, small conventions. And so each of their hotels was an entirely different experience. Their main hotel was in Nashville, and they were next to the Grand Ole Opry, and they owned the Grand Ole Opry. So if you had your convention in that hotel, you got the hee-haw Western music experience. The one they built in Texas, now these hotels, I didn't know this for a long time, those big hotels getting built are empty in the middle. It's anything called an atrium. And so they would develop that atrium with all kinds of things. The one they built in Texas has a copy of the Alamo in the middle of it. So if you go to that hotel, you get the Texas treatment. The one they built in Orlando, you get the Mickey Mouse treatment. They built one near Washington, D.C., which is based on the colonial period. And what was interesting, if you looked on their website, there was a kind of an ad. And what it was a man and a woman and 2 kids. And they've been there a week, and they're going home now, and they're talking. And the 2 kids say what fun they had. They had games, they had all kinds of things we do. We just couldn't stop having fun. It was a great place. And the wife said, and the shopping was great. I never did finish all my shopping. It was great. And the man says, we had a great convention, got a lot done, and so forth. And then in unison, they all say, and we never left the premises. And that was their secret. And they out front with it. They intend to capture all the money of that convention. They had different restaurants there, take your turn on. They had different things for kids to do. They intend to capture all your money. While this was going on, businessmen on 3rd Avenue got kind of excited. This might come in. Oh boy, more business for 3rd Avenue. Not if they could stop. Not if they could help it. They wouldn't get any money from them. Anyway, it was a perfect plan for Chula Vista. In fact, almost all their hotels are out on the outskirts of town. They're not downtown like our convention center is. They're out because they're self-contained. They plan to get all the money. So it was a perfect fit for Chula Vista. Would have been a perfect fit. The business plan was a perfect fit for Chula Vista. So what happened is, where would you like to put your hotel? Well, you got something there called the Signature Park. You got to move that. So our Signature Park got kicked out. It got moved further north, and they selected the heart of the city for their hotel. And so our Signature Park was moved north, so that presents problems. So anyway, but they left. Well, the port liked that plan anyway, so they changed the plan to allow for a couple of big hotels down on the main part of the bayfront. And that was approved by the council, and that was approved by the port, and eventually in about 2010, it was approved by the Coastal Commission. So it's ready to go. Well, then the city, probably 2012 or so, the city put out an all points bulletin across the United States. Who wants to come build a hotel on Chula Vista's bayfront? They got one response from a company named RIDA, R-I-D-A. I don't know what that stands for, but they're based in Texas. They have a lot of hotels on the east Atlantic seaboard. They have a lot of hotels in Europe. They didn't have any out west. I figured they'd never been to Chula Vista. Well, they came here. They got selected, of course. And one of the first things that happened is the fact that because of global warming, the sea is rising. So the Coastal Commission made them raise their land 8 feet. So huge amounts of dirt had been pulled, had come in. If you drive down the bayfront today, you'll see all that dirt. It used to be you could drive around the bayfront and look across flat land. Now you drive around the bayfront, you're looking up, 8 feet up, just on a bunch of dirt high around. And so, but they're doing it with glacial speed. They're moving along gradually. Next year, they're supposed to start really building the hotel. Right. So that worked. But back to our Signature Park, it's now up north, been moved up north. So how do we get people to come up north and try to make it attractive and so forth? We still want people to use our Signature Park. Well, today, if you drive down F Street to the bayfront, you go over the freeway, keep going west. Before you come to the water, it turns south and goes south to meet G Street, right by the big boatyard there. Mm-hmm. Well, on your left, as you drive south, on your left across this big vacant land, where you see the new building that Roar built for office building, is a lagoon. And it's pretty messy. It's not kept up or anything, but it's a lagoon. Mm-hmm. And there's a connection, a creek that connects the lagoon to the bayfront, to the bay. Uh-huh. And if you look to your right as you drive that south part of the road, drive south, you'll see that deep ditch. It's maybe 10 feet deep, that creek.
Right.
Now what you won't see is a big pipe under that bigger than that, big pipe underneath that street. And that carries the water between the lagoon and the bay.
Right.
And I assume at high tide, the water flows in.
Yes.
And the low tide, it flows out.
Right.
Well, that part of the plan is to refurbish where the road is, that lagoon.
Right.
Now, not only that, but back to F Street. F Street, when it's heading west, cuts through that lagoon. F Street, by the plan, is to disappear. And the whole lagoon is going to be refurbished.
Really?
So therefore, they need a much bigger creek.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be a big, much creek. It'd be in the open, and I don't know the dimension of the creek, maybe 50 feet wide.
Yeah.
So that's to come.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting about Rita Development, how they were the ones who worked with our city and finally came in and are going to make that development a reality. We want to thank them not only for doing that, but also for helping us with our current exhibit. They gave us a major contribution to make this exhibit happen. Thank you, Rita Development. So the last thing I wanted to cover before we wind up is your proposal for keeping Friendship Park, this beautiful park we have out here next to the library. And they were going to put the new Chula Vista City Police Station on Friendship Park. And now it's located across the street. But to make that all happen, we had to decide not to do it at Friendship Park. So talk to me about how you were involved in that, you and your wife.
I've become kind of an expert on not to do it. They don't do it.
Yes.
So what happened was, the city, when I moved here in '61, the police department was in the basement of the city hall. Well, they got bigger than that. So they finally had a nice big building on Civic Center. It's at the corner of 4th Avenue and Davidson, and it's now called Building C. That was the police station. Now, that was all when just West Chula Vista existed. But now we're getting big on the east side. East Lake's developing. Old Thai land is next to be, the ranch next to be developed. So now, a lot more work for the police. They need more building. Well, common sense would say, use the building on this side for the West Chula Vista and build a second police station on the other side so the police over there can work out of that. Well, our chief was a man named Emerson, and Chief Emerson played the council like a violin. That every time a policeman got hired, he would, at the council meeting, he'd parade him before the council chamber. He wanted one police station near City Hall. Now, if you look at Chula Vista today, from the bayfront to Otay Lakes, and you put the one police station in the very northwest corner, that's kind of stupid. But that was Chief Emerson. He insisted on a big police station near City Hall. Mm-hmm. So council says, okay, so they tell the staff to find a place and so forth, with all the details. So staff finally decides they're going to put it on Friendship Park. Friendship Park is the park behind the main library, and they're going to put it there. Well, the council usually meets on Tuesday nights, but for some reason they had a Saturday morning meeting, and nobody from the public was there. Yeah. But luckily, a reporter from the Union Tribune was there. And so the staff makes their plea, or makes their presentation, put the police station on Friendship Park. Okay, well, they prove it. Well, it gets in the paper. Things happen fast. We couldn't believe it. So my wife and I, and Frank Roseman and Joan and Will Hyde, we set up a table outside the entrance to the library and start collecting signatures. Now this is not a legal document like the referendums were. This is just anybody who wants to save Friendship Park, sign these petitions. And so a lot of other people started helping us, of course, got involved with it. When it got to the point that we had 4,000 signatures, the council said, let's talk about it. And so they canceled that idea and moved it across on F Street. Mm-hmm. And so we saved Friendship Park. Now, one reason why the staff had picked that park, it was zoned for government office. This whole civic center is zoned for government office. Well, a police station sounds like government office to them. That's one of the reasons they chose it. Well, after the city said no, then Mary Salas was one of the councilwomen at that time. She made the motion to change the zoning to park. And so that passed. So the Friendship Park is now zoned park, which it is, and we'll have it forever.
Good.
And then what happened was this. When the library was first built, the north side was all windows that looked out on that park. But there were huge bookshelves all in front of it that held the reference books. When Betty Wasness was hired, among other things, she came in and she took away those bookshelves. That exposed that beautiful view to the whole library. Today, when you walk in the library, there's that beautiful view of Friendship Park out those windows. And so I told Betty about what we'd done to save Friendship Park when I saw her. Later, when I saw her, I wasn't sure I told her that story, so I told her the story again. I think 2 or 3 more times. It got so when Betty saw me coming, she'd hide. So I guess I told it too many times. But we so appreciated moving those bookshelves, and now we can enjoy the Friendship Park forever.
That's great, Peter. And we now have a deck that overlooks Friendship Park. It's very beautiful, a great place to entertain, both in the day and possibly at night, too. I understand you've written some books about the history of Chula Vista. Can you talk to me a little bit about those books?
Yes. So I said, well, I wouldn't even be interested in all that if it hadn't been for Frank Roseman. He created the museum, and he led all the other things I've done, so much fun. So I made him co-chairman. So I wrote most of that one. Frank later wrote another one about another series they run is Pictures Then, Pictures Now. I love Now and Then, but Frank did that one entirely.
So your association with Frank Roseman's gone back many years. I know Frank has passed and left us recently. And would you like to just say anything about Frank in relation to your relationship with him and how you treasured him as a friend?
Well, Frank Roseman, retired Roar employee. Frank was retired from Crossroads. He and another volunteer, John Willett, who's Cheryl Cox's father, they were super volunteers. And they cleared the Bayfront for the Bayfront plan. They picked up all the trash and so forth. They've done so much. I claim those two had more volunteer hours than all the Russes put together.
Sure.
Anyway, so Frank, among other things, was asked to make that little building in Memorial Park into a museum. And he and John Rojas together. Joan Rojas had all the gimmicks and all the gadgets and all the pictures, but Frank actually did the work. Now, to start the museum, somebody, I guess the city, gave him a little bit of money. So he had some money on account of the city budget. Every time he wanted some money, he had to fill out paperwork. Well, he got tired of that. So he decided to form a board, museum board, and we'd be our own treasury. We'd have our own bank account. So he puts out an all-points call, who wants to join our museum? And I eventually got word about it. And so I went to that meeting, and he told us what he wanted to do. He wanted to form a board and get our own bank account. So he said, come back next time and tell me who wants to volunteer for officers. Well, I came back, I spoke first. And I said, I'm going to be the treasurer or the secretary. Another guy spoke up and said, I'll be the treasurer I'll be the secretary if you'll be the treasurer. Well, sure, I'm an accountant, and I'm usually the treasury. So I said yes. The next day, Frank and I down at the bank opened an account in the museum's name. So we got our own money, which isn't much. So the next few years, Frank's trying to make this museum on very little money. Now, Frank, working with Frank, there's a right way, a wrong way, and Frank's way. You better do it Frank's way. and most people couldn't stand that. They'd make a suggestion. One time I would make a suggestion to him, and immediately, instantly, he would do a 5-minute organized display, presentation, why it's not a good idea. I've never seen anybody think that fast. Perfectly lucid description why it's a poor idea. Then about a month or so later, he said, Peter, I think you ought to do this. And it was the first step. I never said, that was my idea. I knew better than that. Right. But if it was a good idea, he'd eventually come around to it. And the first notion I got was, Peter, I think you ought to do that, which was the first step. So I learned to work with him. You had to get over that idea that it had to be Frank's way. And so I hope you don't edit that part, but that's how it came up, that Frank and I worked so long together, I knew how to manipulate him, so to speak. Anyway.
You knew how to maintain your relationship with Frank.
Yeah, well, yeah. Oh, well, we wouldn't have a museum if it wasn't for Frank. Right. And well, when I retired, I loved teaching. And when I retired in 1996, what am I going to do? I mean, I love teaching. I hate to see Fridays come. I was kind of sad all summer long waiting for fall. I taught economics eventually. I love it. And so when I retired, what do? I needed to do. Well, that timed well with the museum. That's about the time that we got. So I always appreciated what Frank did, and we had fun together. And especially it's fun trying to get things to do without any money. Now, eventually, we had a board that included some people, Pamela Ben-Susan primarily, who knew how to put on a home tour. So she came to Frank and I and said, if we put on a home tour sponsored by the museum, we'll split the proceeds with you. We thought about it for a second or so. Yes. So we had our first big money. And now Pamela was on part of our board too. When she moved to town, she heard about us. She came on the board. Now she had lots of experience in San Diego with Soho and their home tours and so forth. So Chula Vista put on great home tours, and we got a lot to be proud about. So she's responsible for those.
Well, that's great, Peter. So you have a long history of serving our community, being a volunteer within our community, and shaping our community. Also incredible that we had Jim Gehring, who's our current Chula Vista Fire Department chief. He was one of your students. Is that correct?
No, that just shows how old I am.
I see.
Thank you for those nice compliments, but you're wrong. You got to weigh the good against the bad. We're my failures, and my failure is huge. My failure has hurt Chula Vista forever, and that is we do not have any industry. Every time we fought that battle, we lost. We do not have a job base. We do not have a tax base, and that the finance directors have warned the city we're not feasible for the future. We can't do this. Right. And all those failures, time after time after time, we failed to do that. And we're almost built out, so it's too late now. And so several years ago, we hired a new planning director. And he said when he got here, he was surprised to find out that 80% of the workers in Chula Vista have to leave Chula Vista to go to work. And they usually have to go to North County to do it. And he couldn't believe that. Well, that's the result of that. It's also why we're in trouble tax-wise. We're not sustainable as we are. Now, Mayor Salas got the citizens twice to vote for an increase in sales tax. That helped a little bit, but it's not solving the problem. We're not sustainable in the long run. And by the way, that's one of the drawbacks to term limits. That if you said, in the last 20 years, including the Great Recession, what government in the county of San Diego is the most financially well run? Easily the county. They didn't affect them at all. Everybody else had vast layoffs. Everybody else had cut back, way back, and so forth. That they take the long view, at least they used to. They were on there for 20, 25 years. They could take the long view. Now, of course, somebody got wise and put on the ballot to do term limits, so now they're going to have term limits too. But if you get elected to a 4-year thing, you better do your thing in 4 years. And if you get reelected, you only got 8 years. And so I think that showed up in Chula Vista as our failure to have a tax base and a job base. That's a huge failure to me that overcomes whatever good I get.
So I appreciate your wisdom, Peter, and hopefully in the future we're going to be developing those industries that can help support our tax base and our community. Those are great ideas, Peter, and I appreciate everything you've done for our community. You're an extremely good example of what a great citizen in a community like Chula Vista should be. Thank you, Peter Watry.
Thank you.
And we want to say goodbye. We're wrapping it up. Our lives, our future. Thank you all for being with us today. Wave goodbye, Peter. Thank you.
Around the water,
Over and under,
and then up for air.
Pa is rich,
Ma is rich.
so now what do we care?
I love to be beside your side.
Beside the sea, beside the seaside.